welcome to the channel. We're going to talk today about prophecy again because it's in the news, and I've warned over the years many times about newspaper eschatology, where you don't want to just take something that's currently happening and going, this is a fulfillment of something. But when it's abundantly obvious, you have to say something. For example, when Israel became a nation, before that time, before 1948, everybody said it was impossible, and that's during that time between AD 70 and 1948. People made up all sorts of theories about how to spiritualize or allegorize all the prophecies about Israel, because they expected it would never come back. Nations from ancient times typically don't, and especially when they've been scattered to the four winds. And so the establishment of Israel, although by certainly secular means, is no less a fulfillment of prophecy, because just because God uses ordinary events to make that happen doesn't mean God didn't make it happen. And as I've also pointed out before in many of my other prophecy videos, Israel has to be back in the land in unbelief for the final 7 years of judgment prophesied by Daniel, and that's what Revelation is all about, and ties up all the prophecies in the Old Testament. But the problem is that people had already come up with many excuses why it couldn't mean literal Israel, and God is done with them in spite of explicit scriptures to the contrary. But here we are, and we've had another major development, that being the formation of what is called 10 kingdoms in the world. Now, we had an election here in the United States, and though nothing at all was hinted about any of this, suddenly the United States is looking to acquire Canada and Greenland and possibly Central America. And this is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And I have here on the screen an outline I did of a book that was written in 1991 called En Route to Global Occupation by Gary Kaw. I just entitled my outline The New World Order. And it goes into all the basic elements or scaffolding of the deep state. And I don't remember if I have a link for this in the description. If I don't, I'll put one there. Anyway, it goes into a lot of things, but I want to focus on this part here about the United Nations. It was formed by the Council on Foreign Relations, donated land by John Rockefeller, for the purpose of conditioning the American people to accept globalism. Now, that's another interesting term, because it used to be called worldwide, or the world, or things like that, but then somewhere along the line it started to be called globalism, and this seems to be a key word all of its own. But put that aside for the time being. It produced, this being the United Nations and the CFR, produced spin-offs, the Bilderbergers, the Club of Rome, and the Trilateral Commission. And I'm just going to skip down here a little bit to say that the purpose of the name of the Trilateral Commission is that 3 of the kingdoms they're setting up, there's 3 of them, so it's trilateral. But looking at this list again, the purpose of these spin-offs is to regionalize Europe, and they created the European Union. Another purpose is to regionalize and unify the entire world, not just the European Union. People, a lot of newspaper eschatologists in the past have said, oh, look, there's 10 nations in the European Union, and jump the gun. That's what sloppy exegesis will get you, but it was only one part of the puzzle. And they intend to unify the entire world, not just Europe, into 10 political economic regions or kingdoms, and they use the word kingdoms. Those being North America, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, and South Africa, Russia and parts of Asia, Central and South America, North Africa, Middle East, Central Africa, Indonesia, and China. And they want economic interdependence. They want to do away with those national boundaries, and there are scriptures that tell us that God set up the national boundaries in order to slow the spread of sin and to get people to seek God. Exactly how that does both of those things, I think at least one thing we can see in hindsight is that when the entire world bands together as one instead of having separate nations, bad things happen, like the Tower of Babel. So that being said, we know this is a plan, and that we're going to see on this slide how long ago that plan was in place. This website is no longer available. I can't even find it on the Wayback Machine because, as some of you may know, there was a hack of that website for the purpose of hiding things that people didn't want other people to look up. But this is, they're attributing to the Club of Rome, was organized in 1968. 1968. By something called the Morgenthau Group for the purpose of accelerating plans to have the New World Order in place by the year 2000. Obviously, they're a little behind on their schedule, and as I've also pointed out many times before, no matter what it looks like as far as timing goes, God can always slow things down, and I use the example of Israel crossing the Red Sea, and when they're not all the way across, Pharaoh decides to send his army in after them. And God had their wheels of their chariots get stuck in the mud and so forth and slowed them down until all of Israel had passed. Why he didn't just transport them, nobody knows, but that's how it went. The point is that God can make the wheels come off of the train, so to speak. So things will happen when he wants them to happen and no sooner. But this was their plan and this was their map, and you can find other maps with slight variations. Like I said, right now this number 1 in the green is what's happening at the present time as we speak. This is forming right now. Now, there was a decade or so ago when there was talk of a North American Union, and everybody rightly screamed about it because we knew that would mean a lack of national sovereignty, a loss of national sovereignty. But with the way they've sold it this time, again, it's a surprise. Nobody on either side saw this coming, officially. The point is that they're selling it as that this is our country just expanding instead of joining with other countries. And in a way that is biblical because there will be one king over each kingdom. So you can see it's kind of odd the way they've divided some things up. If this is even an accurate map of the world, that's another question. But and we'll notice that curiously that Japan is its own kingdom. What's up with that? Who knows? There are backroom deals. Who knows what has been arranged and why they divided it up this way. But the point is that they have divided it up. And so we can expect that since number 1 is happening, number 2 is also, even though that really started earlier, that's just the order in which they've listed it. It really has nothing to do with the sequence. But so we've actually seen that the European Union has been a thing, and it's been a number of years until this happened. Well, they had to set it up, and it's a little more difficult to do in the U.S. than Europe because of our Constitution, and I think, personally, because of the number of active Christians here, that is a little tougher nut to crack because of the number of Christians. And I've said there's an earlier video I've done called The Linchpin of Prophecy, where I believe that the presence of Christianity suddenly being gone from the world is the linchpin that kicks off the final 7 years, possibly more, because there is a gap between the rapture, the departure of the church, and during which time the seals are opened. You've seen my other chart on that. And then when the 7-year treaty with Israel is made, then that's when the tribulation 7 years kicks off. But the point right now is that this is happening. Number 1 and number 2 actually two has been in place. Number 1 is happening now, because when this happens, when this goes through, the rest will fall like dominoes. I think the European Union might have been a test case as well, that it's been set up because they could do some things easier there than they can do here. But this being a thing is a very big deal. And I've also said many years ago in a message board when people were saying, let's take down the New World Order, let's take down the deep state. And I said, that'll happen, but beware of what fills the vacuum. And that's what we're seeing right now. And again, this was not hinted at that there would be any such thing as a North American Union in any of the campaignings, in case anybody wants to say, well, those right-wingers, they were all fooled. No, everybody was fooled. The fires are no accident. The hurricanes are no accident. The poisoning, the fogs, the drones, none of that's an accident. Okay. But the point here, I don't want to get too sidetracked, is on where we are in Bible prophecy. We are here. You are here. These 10 kingdoms are forming. They're beginning to form. They may all form before the rapture. I don't know. It can happen very quickly. Now that this has been a thing, suddenly we're, one giant big kingdom. We also know that the U.S. Constitution has only been there in paper for quite a while. They have not been honoring it. The Act of 1871 that set up the city-state of Washington, D.C., basically overthrew the nation at that point, 1871. And so there's all talk of all this talk of suddenly overthrowing a lot of bad things has everyone happy, including possibly the end of the Fed and the IRS and income tax and all that goes with that. But I think, possibly, this is just a hunch, that they're giving us everything we want because it won't matter for very much longer. That's how you sell things. It's a bait and switch on a scale unimaginable. And I think the whole world being divided up this way is unprecedented. So just you are here, 1 and 2 are a thing. Okay, and it's only a matter of months, I think, until this happens completed. And we'll probably start blending south here. Who knows whether this will be, tied in with the North American Union or a South American Union. Who can say? The point is that there will be 10. Okay. Now, I made a chart. This is not on my website anywhere yet. I'm not sure if I'll put it up or not, but we're going to see a different chart in a minute. But this one is the best I can do to try to tie together what it is about these 10 kingdoms. Now, the 10 kingdoms, if you see this green circle on the right, it's actually 7 heads, but the 10 horns are the 10 kingdoms on the top of one of the heads. Okay, it does get confusing, and that's why I'm doing this video, because sometimes the terms that Daniel used for beasts and horns and things are not the same term that John used when he talks of a beast. He's talking about a particular horn. But at the same time, the fact that it is a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns ties it in unmistakably with Daniel at the same time. So that's why I have this green extending all around these 7 mountains and 7 heads. These are the 7 heads that are on this beast. But Daniel did not see 7 heads. Now, I need to go and find the notes I forgot to open up so I could give you some more details about all of this detail, for lack of a better word. So let me have that up and running. And so, yeah, what I mainly wanted to look at was the fact to confirm in my own mind that Daniel did not know about the 7 heads. He mentions the 10 horns. So Daniel sees what's in these blue boxes. First in Daniel 2 was a statue at the bottom, which has the head of gold, which was Nebuchadnezzar, and he was king of Babylon. And then the chest and arms of silver was the Medo-Persian Empire, Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian. And then we have the bronze belly and thighs, which was the kingdom of Greece and Alexander the Great. Then the legs of iron were the 4th terrible beast set apart from all the rest that was turned out to be Rome. These are paralleled in Daniel 7 with the lion with wings, the bear with 3 ribs in his mouth and one side raised up. That's the Medes were stronger than the Persians or something like that. Corresponding with the belly and thighs of bronze is the 4-headed leopard with 4 wings. This, we know in hindsight, referred to Alexander the Great and the fact that his kingdom was not given to any of his sons. He died very young in his 30s, but to his 4 generals. And we have Ptolemy, Seleucid, Lysimachus, and Cassander. Whereas the Ptolemy and Seleucids were the kingdoms on the north and the south that turned out they were stronger than the other 2. But that's what these 4s represent. Now the 5th one, the one that the Iron Beast, he sees he being Daniel, 10 horns and a little horn. The little horn displaces 3 of the 10. So this is also seen by John a little bit, much later. But we also know, before we move on from Daniel, that the feet had part iron and part clay and 10 toes. So the 10 toes obviously parallel with Daniel 7 with the 10 horns. And being iron mixed with clay, they are an outgrowth later on of the same beast. Okay? That's why there's this red beast. It's called in Revelation. It's specified to being red and having 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay? And again, we go back to where John sees in Revelation. Let me scoot this up a little bit. We're going to look at Revelation 11, 13, and 17, where John is told that the beast we're going to read about has 5 kingdoms fallen by the time of John. 1 is now the Roman Empire. 1 is not yet. That's this beast, the red beast, which is also part of this beast, that is more aligned with the feet, iron mixed with clay, and the 10 toes, and the 10 horns, 3 of which will be displaced by 1, which is called the 8th king, or the little horn. I know it's hard to keep up with. What I've got here on the side, which is probably too small to read, 7 heads and 10 horns identified as the 4th one Daniel saw, but the red color indicates additional meaning. John calls the little horn the 8th king, who comes from the 7, not the 10. He displaces 3 of the 10, but he came from the 7. Okay? But this little horn is called the first beast. That's how it gets confusing. This is an individual as opposed to kings and kingdoms that are intertwined. It's not a kingdom, it's an individual who will, in mine and many others' opinion, die and rise again at the midpoint, because he dies, and then he arises from the abyss at the midpoint. And this is when he is called by John's revelation, the one who was, who is not, and will come. Notice on the 5 mountains, 5 have fallen, 1 is now, 1 is not yet. But when he talks about this first beast, the little horn, the 8th king, he says, who was, is not, and will come. Yes, it's confusing. It's just the way it is, and that's why I took days and days on looking at this, even though I've studied prophecy for years, because these little details I don't always go into. And so let's look now at some passages. Here we have Revelation 13, and it's going to have a brief mention. It does the beast of the sea and the beast from the earth. That one we're not going to be concerned with as much in this video. That's the second beast, also called the false prophet, has 2 horns like a lamb but speaks like a dragon. So it is a false religious system, the second beast. And it's this second beast who orders the mark of the beast and draws attention to the first, like the unholy trinity, as many have pointed out. We have the dragon, the first beast, and the second beast. And the first beast is paralleled with the Son of Man, the Messiah, because he will die and rise again. But he'll also be described as having, in some of the Old Testament passages, a withered right arm and right eye, possibly referring to the way he died. But then he rises from the abyss, possessed by Satan, and a lot of, that's when the bowl judgments begin. But this beast of the sea, it says, Then I saw a beast rise out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. On each horn was a royal crown, and on each head was a slanderous name. The beast was like a leopard, with a bear's paws and a lion's mouth. The dragon gave this beast his power, his throne, and wide-ranging authority. One of the beast's heads appeared to have sustained a mortal wound, but was healed. The whole earth was astounded at the beast, and they worshipped the dragon, open Satan worship, for giving authority to it. They said, who's like the beast and who can fight it? And I just want to stop on that paragraph to say, appeared to have sustained a mortal wound. I used to believe that that means it wasn't an actual death and resurrection, but it's been pointed out that this same appeared word is used for the Lamb in heaven who opens the seals, who appeared to have suffered a mortal wound, and we know the Lamb was actually killed. So it's just the way it looked. You could tell by looking that this lamb had been slain. And that's what John is also saying here, that this beast had been slain, but was healed. And this is why the earth worships the dragon, who apparently raised him, unholy trinity. The beast was given, verse 5, given a mouth with which to speak outrageous and slanderous things. And you can read about more of that in, I think, Daniel 11 and 12, somewhere in there. And its authority would be for 42 months. This is why we know it's the midpoint. That's 3.5 years, prophetic years, which is said in Daniel, usually in the term time, times, and half a time. That's 3.5 years. The week is the term for 7 years. So we know this is the midpoint. We have a lot of ways to line up the midpoint of the 7 years, because Daniel says halfway through, the prince that will come will break the 7-year covenant and declare himself God and all these things, and commit the abomination, which Jesus referred to the prophet Daniel by name and said that there's going to be this abomination. And so that's the midpoint. We also have the Apostle Paul making mention of how to identify this beast as the one who will declare himself God. And we read about here in Revelation, in other passages, that this is the midpoint, as we've seen on that chart that I've displayed many times before, that midpoint is when the beast is killed or rises, and then, the bowl judgments begin. And that's also the point at which the abomination happens, and the people in Israel are supposed to recognize that and flee to the mountains. Most commentators see this as Petra, and that's at the south side of, I think, of the Dead Sea. Anyway, only a third of them will be saved out of the tribulation, so everybody's not going to run. And as I said, Israel needs to be purged. There are a lot of fakes there, a lot of people in unbelief who will stay in unbelief. But those whose eyes are opened by the abomination will flee. The people of Judea will flee to the mountains and be kept safe for 3.5 years, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. All three ways of saying the same amount of time. So the beast will have authority for that much time. Now the beast will be ruling as a king before that, and a lot of things are set up, and this is how he wins over the world. But then, like I said, he's killed, rises, and then there's open Satan worship, and all this stuff happens. It says, it opened up its mouth to slander God and his name and his sanctuary and all who live in heaven, and was allowed to do battle with the holy people and conquer them. As I would say, a note here, Jesus said the gates of hell would not prevail against his church, so his church can't be here for this. So even if you're not a pre-tribber, you can't be any farther than a mid-tribber. As well as to have authority over all tribes, people groups, languages, and nations. All the earth dwellers, or earthlings, will worship it, whose names have not been written in the scroll of the life of the Lamb who had been slaughtered from the establishment of the world. So that's Revelation 13. Then we go over to 17. If you remember from the chart, we're going to have... I forgot to go back to 11. Let me do that first. About the two witnesses and everything. And it says, in verse 7, when they complete their testimony, 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years during the trumpet judgments, the beast ascending out of the abyss will fight and conquer them and kill them. And it says their corpses will lie in the main square of the city, figuratively called Sodom and Egypt. That's where their masters was crucified. This identifies it unmistakably as Jerusalem. So the witnesses are being killed there, and then it says everybody in the world gawks at them for 3.5 days, refusing them burial. And they sent each other presents, which again tells me this can't be the end of the tribulation, because people don't do that when the entire world is so devastated, there's nothing to eat, drink, or breathe, pretty much. They're happy because the two prophets had tormented them, but after 3.5 days, the spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on all those who watched. Then they heard a voice from the sky say to the two, come up here. And they ascended into the sky in a cloud while their enemies watched. And then there was a great earthquake, etc. So that was 11. We read about the beast arising from the abyss at that time to kill them. And we read 13, so now let's go to 17, where we would see the woman riding the beast. And then to go back to this We have the Mother of Harlots, the root of all false religion, sits on all 7 mountains, as we're going to read. All 7. Who are these 2? The first 2 that fell before the 4? Because Daniel only looks forward. But John looks forward and back. There's argument. Is it Egypt and Assyria? Is it the original form of Babylon? One of them? Nobody knows for sure. That's why I don't really say. But there's 7 of them. The woman has written them all. So she has been around since the beginning of kingdoms that have had, in the opinion of the commentary we're going to look at later, something to do with oppressing Israel, because almost exclusively Bible prophecy is about Israel. It sometimes involves the rest of the world, and the few about the rapture are about the church, but other than that, it's always the center of the bullseye is Israel. And so when we consider who these prior kingdoms are, we know that they have to have something to do with Israel and also with this religion that has ridden them all. Now, it's a known fact that people will, kingdoms will use religion as the glue to keep people together better than they can do with, any non-religious mean. It works because people have literally the fear of God in them. That doesn't mean all religion is false, because obviously if there are copies, there's an original. And that's what everybody fell from when sin entered the world. But since the beginning of false organized religion, you could say, then that's how long this religious system has been around. So it can't be a recent religion. It's something that goes all the way back, the taproot of all false religions. That's what the Mother of Harlots means. Okay, so now we're looking at Babylon rides the beast here in chapter 17 of Revelation. Then one of the 7 angels with the bowls came and talked with me. Now this is a look back after the bowls have been poured out. So they're going back again. They do that sometimes, like between each set of 7. So here at the end, they're doing it again. He said, "Here I will show you the judgment of the great harlot sitting on many waters. Also, the kings of the earth have been promiscuous with her, and the earth dwellers have been made drunk with the wine of her harlotry." This is spiritual harlotry. "He carried me away in spirit to the desert, and there I saw a woman riding a red beast, covered with slanderous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Whether the desert is significant or not, as far as actual location, or just this is where John was shown the vision, because Iran, Iraq, that area, that there's desert, and it's associated with Babylon and some other prophecies. Anyway, it says this woman is riding a red beast, the red beast with the 7 heads, not just the 4 that John saw, but all 7. And the 10 horns, so she's connected as that as well. She was clothed in purple and red, colors of royalty, and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls, so she's incredibly wealthy. She had in her hand a golden chalice filled with the disgusting filth of her harlotry. On her forehead was written a cryptic name. It does not say Mystery Babylon is her name. On her forehead was written a name cryptic, or mysterious, or hidden. Babylon the Great is her name. So the name written on her head is Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots and the disgusting things of earth. And in verse 6, John goes on, "I saw that she was drunk with the blood of the holy people and those who testify of Jesus. And I was aghast at the sight of her. Then the angel said to me, 'Why are you shocked? I will explain to you the secret of the woman and the 7-headed, 10-horned beast that carries her,'" the beast she rode in on. Okay, secret is the word mysterion in Greek. It means something that God has hidden that cannot be found out until he reveals it. It means kept close. And so the angel is going to reveal the meaning of this sight. The woman is a symbol. What the angel is about to say is not a symbol. You don't explain a symbol with another symbol. So this is the literal explanation. You don't reinterpret what the angel is about to say. He says, "The beast you saw was and is not now," remember that, "and is about to ascend from the abyss and then be taken into oblivion. The earth dwellers whose names have not been written on the scroll of life from the establishment of the world will be in awe of the beast that was, is not now, and will be." This takes wisdom. No kidding. The 7 heads are 7 mountains the woman sits upon. These are 7 kings. Some, like the old King James, are misleading here. They say it's also 7 kings. No, they are one and the same. The language is clear in the Greek. The 7 heads are 7 kings, not 7 hills. They're specifically saying the thing is that there are 7 mountains that are also representative of 7 kings. 5 have fallen. Seeing the chart there. 1 is now the Roman Empire of John's day, and the other has not yet come, the resurrected beast, you could say. But when he does, he will only remain for a short time. We know it's 42 months. Short time for a kingdom, especially a world empire. The beast that was and is not now, the same person we've been talking about, is an 8th that comes from the 7, but is proceeding to oblivion. So he's a king like the 7, but he's also going to uproot 3 horns. I'll just keep reading. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet acquired a kingdom. So the 7 heads, the 7 mountains, are a sequence of kings and kingdoms, basically world empires. But the 10 horns are contemporaneous. They are all at the same time. That has not happened. The world has never been ruled by 10 kings at the same time, who have not yet acquired a kingdom, but they will share royal authority with the beast for 1 hour. Again, the short time, the 42 months. They will all be in agreement, which, by the way, just to stop for a second on the 1 hour. If the 1 hour, speculation, is 3.5 years, then what's the significance of the half hour of silence at the 7th seal before the tribulation itself begins? Is it telling us the duration? I don't know. Anyway, the 10 kings will all be in agreement and give their power and authority to the beast. So before the beast rises, there must be a 10 kingdom world. That's why we're seeing it now. They precede the beast. This is a prerequisite, just as Israel being in the land in unbelief is a prerequisite. It doesn't tell us timing, it tells us sequence. They will be in agreement and give their power and authority to the beast. They will battle the Lamb, but the Lamb will conquer them, since he is the Master of Masters, or Lord of Lords, and King of Kings, and those with him are appointed and chosen and trustworthy. Now, to help explain some more about the woman writing them, the waters you saw, which the harlot is sitting upon, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So a world religion, but one that has been around since the beginning. The 10 horns you saw, and the beast, this is interesting, will despise the harlot that brought them to power. Now they don't need her anymore. They will obliterate her, strip her naked, consume her flesh, and set her on fire. That's pretty thorough. They hate religion so bad. Why do they hate religion even though they use it and promote false religion and gain from it? That's precisely it. They gained from it, but they don't need it anymore. They hated having to depend on it and carry her around. But at the midpoint, she's no longer needed. And so it will be direct worship of Satan. This is because God put it in their hearts to do his bidding and to unite in giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. God is in control. And the woman you saw, is it New York? Been around since ancient times. Is it the United States or the European Union? It's a great city. Remember, we're not allegorizing the allegory. We're not symbolizing the symbol. This is the literal answer. That woman, the religious system, is the great city that has sovereignty over the kings of the earth. That's why they throw her off. Now, this is being spoken of in the present tense to the time of John. False religion has always been there, but a great city, not a country, not a system of government, not an individual, a city. As I've said before, we have 3 city-states in the world. We have Washington, D.C., we have the Corporation of London, and we have the Vatican. So we have, I think, the brains, the muscle, and the spirit. We have the financial command center. We have the, used to be military industrial, now I think it's just military, and the religious. One of those, or a new one, will be the city wherein the false religion is centered. Take that however you want. But it won't be the satanic worship, because that they all hate this woman, and we'll throw her off at the midpoint. So up to, from ancient times up to the midpoint of the tribulation, this woman, this religious, all the false religions, and her children, because she's the mother of harlots, will be thrown off at the midpoint, and this is to be centered in a city called Babylon the Great. Now, Washington, D.C. isn't old. London is kind of old, older than Washington, D.C. Vatican's been in Italy a long time, but hasn't been Vatican until after the Babylonian adepts. If you look at Harry Ironside's church history, I think also some of Philip Schaff's, where they were, they fled and went to one place. They were in Pergamum in the days of John, when, because it even mentions in the chapters 2 and 3 of where the letters that John says to send to the 7 churches, about there you are where Satan has his throne in Pergamon. The endings are, depends on the part of speech, but and historically these people then moved this religious system to Italy. Just a piece of data, a puzzle piece. So, given all of that, I think you can see that, it is helpful to draw a picture, but there are elements that are overlapping, more like a Venn diagram in some ways, but a really complicated one, and we're going to see something like that in a minute. But we have had the statue of these 4 kingdoms from Daniel's time forward, and then John gets a lot more detail about the 4th beast, that it has had 7 heads, and that there will be these 10 horns, 10 toes, and those will be kingdoms that all rule at the same time. That's the New World Order that's forming right now as we speak. And that one of these, the rise of the Antichrist, one of these 7 will take out 3 of the other kings of the 10. Okay, so now we're going to go to this commentary. I don't know why documentary flew into my head like that. It just happens sometime. But anyway, this is one I recommended before, Spirit and Truth. And we're at section 4.3.2. 4.3, and then there's a 0.1 and 2 here. So we're going to take some time and go through this and look at their chart as well. And hopefully this will help everything tie together. It may make it worse. I don't know. But I got to try, because we're watching the 10 kingdoms form. European Union was one thing. It's like, and it stayed there for quite a while. And then all of a sudden this happens. And happens in a way that doesn't surprise any student of Bible prophecy. So that's why it's important to go over. And reading here in the commentary, it says, both Daniel and John are given important information concerning the identity of various symbols employed in the book of Revelation. In his night vision, Daniel sees 4 beasts, one of which has 10 horns. In John's vision, he sees 2 beasts, one of which has 7 heads and 10 horns, and the other has 2 horns, a single head with 2 horns. Although the fact that both Daniel and John saw beasts and horns does not necessarily mean their visions are related, there are a number of other characteristics concerning their visions which indicate that God was showing each of them different aspects of the same kings and kingdoms related to Gentile domination or dominion throughout history and the final form of Gentile power at the return of Messiah. Perhaps the most difficult aspect for interpreters of passages involving the beasts, heads, and horns is accounting for their differences, while at the same time appreciating their similarities. That's why it's complicated. In various passages, all 3 symbols, beasts, heads, and horns, are said to be kings. In addition, sometimes kings represent sequential rulers and their representative kingdoms, and other times contemporaneous kings with a single kingdom, and I've already explained. And if that weren't enough, the distinction between an individual king and the kingdom he represents is not always readily discerned. But we have to try. There's a blessing for trying in Revelation. And in order to understand, and I think it's important to give all this backstory to understand where we are in the 10 Kings and all that. To understand the significance of the symbols which John saw in the book of Revelation, we need to first become familiar with some of the things Daniel was shown pertaining to Gentile dominion at the time of the end. So he says we're going to limit our examination to 2 main passages that deal with the sequence of kingdoms leading up to the second return of Christ. The first is Nebuchadnezzar's dream consisting of the image, and the second is Daniel's night vision of the animals rising from the sea. When these 2 passages are compared, and just to say that sea represents Gentiles and the land, the Jews, in the Bible, that's just how it is. When the 2 passages are compared, it becomes evident they represent 2 different perspectives on the same subject. 4 major world kingdoms, which constitute the times of the Gentiles during which Israel will be precluded from full control of her land and her promised blessing in the Messianic kingdom. Messianic kingdom being the millennium after the tribulation. Each of the passages begin with a description of the Babylonian kingdom of which Daniel was currently a captive, having been deported from Jerusalem, and closes with the final Gentile kingdom being destroyed by God's kingdom on earth. That's the part where the statue is seen being destroyed by a huge rock or mountain that is thrown on the statue's feet, and the whole thing crumbles to dust. That's Jesus taking over finally at the end of the tribulation, once the kingdoms have run their course. Several aspects are seen from a comparison of the related passages. Perspective, downward trend, and broken by God. Nebuchadnezzar's dream describes a series of kingdoms from man's perspective. They appear as a beautiful image comprised of various metals, some precious. Daniel's night vision describes the same kingdoms from God's perspective. They appear as a series of vicious beasts. So 2 perspectives, okay, from man and from God. Then the downward trend. In both passages, the sequence shows a downward trend. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the statue, the head of the image is gold, chest and arms silver, belly and thighs bronze, and the legs of iron, the feet of iron, and partly clay. The value of each metal reduces as the kingdom advances. At the same time, the strength of each metal grows stronger with each kingdom until the last kingdom, which contains 2 extremes, the strength of iron and the weakness of clay. In Daniel's night vision, the last beast is uniquely terrible compared with the preceding beast, and much additional information is given concerning the last beast. And then we have broken by God. Both the image and the last beast are destroyed directly by God. We're not going to do it. God isn't going to have us do it. The people who are delusional enough to think that they're going to stay and fight the Antichrist during the tribulation are not going to do it. It's done by God. Both the image and the last beast are destroyed directly by God. This tells us that the kingdoms represented by the series of precious metals and the ferocious beast spans from Daniel's time until God's kingdom comes on earth. Most conservative interpreters, who believe the book of Daniel to be inspired, interpret the 4 metals and 4 beasts representing kingdoms of Babylon, because sometimes people say Babylonian, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, as I've already mentioned. And there they have a handy little chart of those things with the references. And then we go into this really gnarly chart, 4.3.2, symbols of kingdoms. Having compared Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's night vision, we're now prepared to take in the big picture concerning the various beast heads and horns seen by John. The diagram below illustrates the major symbols in the visions given to Daniel and John concerning the beast heads and horns, which contribute to an understanding of the book of Revelation. 7 heads and 10 horns of Daniel Revelation. I don't know about you, but I think this is confusing. But it's partly confusing because it has more information than my chart, which you can see on the legend here on the lower left. Is behind my head. Sorry about that. I'll move that up. The green arrows start with a block are supports. Then we have a red arrow with no beginning symbol, or what destroys something else. Then we have blue dotted arrows is a sequence. A solid black arrow beginning with a dot is something a kingdom has. A green arrow with no beginning, the first green arrow is kind of a yellow-green. This is just more of a blue-green, is a source. And then the pink arrow with a double arrowhead is rules over something else. So there's color significance and line shapes and all sorts of things. If you ignore the lines, it isn't too bad. So they're showing some overlap here in the two red boxes of the five fallen and the four beasts and kings, and then the terrible beast and the seventh king within that, and all sorts of things. So it is complex, but we have to try. And then we can all see at the end, the 10 horns have never been before. And then three of them are plucked out, so that leaves 7, and then 3 that are plucked out, replaced by the little horn, the 8th king. Okay, so the chart is called an entity relationship diagram. It contains entities with rounded rectangles and relationships shown as arrows. The main purpose of the diagram is to identify each entity from the prophetic scriptures and show how it relates to the others. And each one is numbered for identification. You can go through that another time if you want. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. And jump down here to 4.4321. The descriptions follow in the numerical order in the diagram. It says, the world consists of the sea, which the 4 beasts rise out of, and the earth or land from which the 4 kings and the false prophet arise. The harlot, who sits on many waters, is supported in some sense by the peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues upon which she sits. She does, take everything from people, money, time, sometimes their lives. The false prophet causes the whole world to make an image of the beast. The terrible beast is said to devour the whole earth. The beast is given authority over everybody. The sea with the earth makes up the whole world. Both land and sea together denote all regions of the earth. At times, the sea denotes Gentile nations, so it isn't always Gentiles. Whereas the earth or land denotes the Jews, as I mentioned earlier. And then it says, as for the earth, together with the sea makes up the whole world. Both land and sea cover the whole world. At times, the earth denotes only the Jews, whereas the sea denotes, I said that backwards, the Gentiles. In the book of Daniel, all we find mentioned in relation to the sequence of kingdoms is the 4 beasts and the corresponding 4 metals. There we find that the 4th beast has 10 horns, but nowhere is there any explicit mention of 7 heads. But they have a section, they look at that and see where it could possibly be gleaned, but it's not clear. We do find one helpful bit of information because the 10 horns are said to be on the head of the 4th beast. So they're all in the 4th beast. It's helpful when we come to the Revelation because it hints at a correlation between beasts and heads and indicates that the 10 horns are found on the head of the last beast, not distributed across several heads. When Daniel so if you see, I've seen illustrations that have them, one horn on each head and then an extra ones on one of the heads. That's not how it was. They're all on the last beast, the last head. When Daniel sees his vision, the duration of all 4 beast kings is yet future. Thus he was shown 4 beasts. At the time John wrote Revelation, all 4 beasts had already arisen, and the initial phase of the Roman Empire was in progress. Thus, John's vision in relation to the identity of the kings is from a perspective of his day, taking the entire sweep of history, past, present, and future. It says Daniel makes the number less, but he started with his own times. And just to make that point, this is a quote from somebody else in his sources here. We have seen elsewhere in scriptures, and I'm skipping the green part of quotations, but they rule out other theories. So if you want to look into that, you could, take the time to do that. We have seen elsewhere in Scripture that kingdoms are often represented by their kings or as mountains. Note that the harlot who sits on the heads is considered to be the mother of harlots and abominations. This implies her origin in distant history and past, and argues for an understanding of the king's kingdom spanning long periods of time. So this is how we rule things out. As I've said before, prophecy, or any other study really, but especially prophecy, is like a jigsaw puzzle. The first thing you usually do is look for the corners and edge pieces. Those are our limits. Those are things that constrain interpretation possibilities. And that's what he's doing here. And a lot of these green quoted sections are because of side notes that rule out other things than what conclusions the commentator has drawn. He says, yet wisdom is required to identify the heads, which are kings. That's what it says. Wisdom is required. Same thing with the mark of the beast, which I'll just say real quick, as I've mentioned before. Possibly, since the words 660 and 6 in the Greek all start with the letter basically X, the triple X might be the beast name. And we have SpaceX. We have X, the social media platform. What's the other X? Don't know for sure yet, but I think it's interesting to note that the founder, the current owner of the X things, has really been instrumental in making the North American Union a reality. Just to put that out there. Wisdom is required to identify the heads which are kings. Which kings or kingdoms do they represent? Regardless of the identity of the first two fallen kings, Babel and Egypt, or Egypt and Assyria, as I mentioned before, the next four are identified clearly because in hindsight they're unmistakable. And then John is shown two additional kings yet future, a seventh and an eighth. The eighth king is not one of the seven heads or mountains, but arises from the seven. Okay, this passage is somewhat confusing because it's accounting for the fact that a single king will represent both of the kingdoms which are future to John's vision. So the Roman Empire and the revived Roman Empire. And remember, people will say, no, Babylon it's not going to be a revived Roman Empire, it's Babylon. No, Babylon is a woman riding the beast that the beast hates and will overthrow. So they're not the same thing. The Antichrist, the beast, arises out of the seventh kingdom, but also suffers a wound as a revived to rule as an undisputed eighth king. Skipping the quote, the seven heads are said to have names of blasphemy. On the beast's heads are names that amounted to words of conduct injurious to God's honor and holiness. That's what it means to blaspheme. The heads themselves, the kingdoms they represent, blaspheme God. The tendency of great kings is to regard themselves as divine, their rule having been gained by their own hand, and their opposition to God and his people is legend, and they give some references to that. Now, he gives another possibility, and then he's going to, I think, shoot it down, if I recall, for understanding the seven heads, which removes this need for John's vision backward in history to take in vistas earlier than Daniel's day. Okay, so they're just going to look into this. How can that be? John sees seven heads, but Daniel only sees four beasts, yet one of Daniel's beasts, the leopard, is said to contain four heads. And I've already mentioned what those are, but we're going forward with this scenario. We're also told that the fourth beast has a single head. If we add the heads of the other two beasts, then it would account for seven heads, one on each of the first, second, and fourth beasts, and four on the third. This view has the advantage of removing the need to identify kingdoms prior to the time of Daniel to account for all seven heads, which John sees. It seems to provide a solution, never quit too soon, which allows both John's and Daniel's visions to have the same historic scope, but from different perspective. John looks back, but no further back than the time of Daniel. Unfortunately, there are several problems with taking the seven heads implicitly seen by Daniel as the seven heads explicitly shown to John. On the five fallen, they go through 4 points here. Five fallen beasts or kings, sequential kingdoms, and historic spans. So under five fallen, John is told concerning the seven heads, there are seven kings, five had fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come. If we understand the first three beasts of Daniel represent kingdoms which had passed from view in John's day, that is to say Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, and the fourth beast to be Rome, then we would have expected John to be told six have fallen, one is, and none is to come. For at the time of John, three of the four beasts had passed from the stage of history, and six of the seven heads should have been accounted for. As for beasts or kings, Daniel was explicitly told that four beasts having seven implicit heads are four kings. John is told that his seven heads are seven kings. If each of Daniel's beasts is a king, how can we take the four heads of one of the beasts and make them kings in the same sense as the beast? John's seven heads cannot be the same as the seven heads of Daniel's beast, because the seven heads implicitly seen by Daniel only represent four kings. For Daniel, it's the beasts which represent kingdoms, whereas for John, it's the heads. There's the key. I'll say that again. For Daniel, it's beasts that represent kingdoms, whereas for John, it is the heads. The four heads seen upon Daniel's third beast provide additional information concerning the internal workings of the third beast kingdom. For example, correspond to the four notable horns, but are not to be included in the tally of heads as seen by John. Because as I said already, we know from hindsight, they were four generals of Alexander the Great. Then the third point, sequential kingdoms. Another problem with this view is the inconsistency of treating the four heads of the third beast, which are typically understood to be four contemporaneous rulers who follow upon Alexander the Great, the same as John's seven heads, which appear to be sequential in their relationship. And then historical span, this view limits the historical span of the seven heads which the harlot sits upon to extend no earlier than the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the first beast. If so, then the scripturally significant kingdoms of Babel, Egypt, and Assyria cannot be accounted for in the right of the harlot. Yet aspects of her identity argue for her right to extend back to very early history, for she is the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. How could she be considered the true mother if she only began to ride as late as Babylon, in the sense of excluding the kingdom of Babel under Nimrod in Genesis 10, 8 through 10? In that case, she too would be a daughter rather than the mother. So these are the reasons that theory didn't work. So it's tempting to simplify. It always is. But there are significant hurdles. And it seems better to take the seven heads which are found upon the beast and upon the dragon as denoting seven historic kingdoms under the sway of Satan. And then they make a reference here in this quote to the devil tempting Jesus in the wilderness and showing him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. Now, many take this to say, look, he took him so high up you could see the entire world at once. That's out of context. I wish people wouldn't use that argument, but on other topics. But the point is that he's showing him how long he's had control of world governments, and it goes all the way back. It's all been delivered to me, he said, and Jesus didn't dispute that. Now, section 4325 is about the five fallen kings. Here to represent kingdoms, assuming Rome is the kingdom which is at the time of John, and that is an assumption. Then 5 kingdoms preceded, and 1 will follow. We know from Daniel that 3 kingdoms preceding Rome's were in reverse order: Greek, Medo-Persian, and Babylon, yet 2 more are required. If we limit our scope of inquiry to kingdoms of a special relevance to Israel, then 2 additional candidates immediately come to mind: Assyria and Egypt. They both gave Israel trouble. Since Israel was born as a nation in the Exodus from Egypt, that's important, the 5 fallen kings represent all fallen kingdoms of significance which oppressed Israel from her birth to John's time, the time of Rome. Fair point. The most likely candidates are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. They persecuted God's people and ruled the known world before John wrote the Revelation. At the moment John wrote, Israel was in subjection to Rome. It had been in subjection to Greece, Persia, and Babylon, but in its earlier history, Israel had been in slavery to Assyria, and in its beginnings was in slavery to Egypt. So Isaiah writes, "For this, thus says the Lord God, my people went down aforetime into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them without cause." Now, some people take the Assyrian, singular, as meaning the beast will be an Assyrian, but we can make statements like that today, like the American tourist. We don't mean one person. We mean tourists from America, right? I believe that's in context the same sense of the word there. The view which takes Egypt as the first kingdom is based in part on understanding the 7 heads as Gentile kingdoms and the context of Revelation 17 as favoring a Jewish-Gentile distinction. Evidence for such an emphasis can be found in the broader context of Revelation, especially chapters 7, 11, 12, and 14. Recognizes the well-documented opposition each of these kingdoms represented to God's people. But limiting the kingdoms to only those which existed after the calling of Abraham, the father of the Jews, has the weakness of being unable to account for the full history of the harlot. That's what is constraining us here. This is our corner piece. It can be shown that she predates the Jewish nation. Then upon what head can she be said to have written prior to Egypt and the events of the Exodus? That's why we have to go back further. Taking the first 2 kingdoms to be Egypt and Assyria does not seem to do full justice to the description of the harlot. She's given the name Babylon and is identified as the mother of harlots and the abominations of earth. Okay, these pop-ups don't go away right away. Sorry about that. In order to be the mother of harlots and the abominations, which denotes spiritual idolatry, she would have to be the source from which her daughter harlots were born. As noted earlier, thus it seems best to see the harlot as having ridden upon the beast, sitting upon its 7 heads throughout history. This would argue for understanding the 5 fallen kingdoms as stretching back beyond Egypt to the time of the construction of the first major city recorded in Scripture, Babel. That's from Genesis 11, 1-9, which I think is worth reading right now. This section they have called out here. Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, Someone, if you wanted to compliment some hunter, you would say like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Or you could take it the other way, that this was a nasty person before the Lord, meaning against the Lord. Okay? And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And then it lists some other things, including Akkad. People love, especially critics of the Bible, talk about Akkadian. The Bible goes before that. In the land of Shinar. Where's that? That's in the desert. Iran, Iraq area. From that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh. And a bunch of other things. If the kingdom of Babel is taken to be the first kingdom, and the 5 kingdoms span from the time of the Tower of Babel through the initial appearance of Rome, the most likely candidates for the second kingdom would be either Egypt or Assyria. Of the two, Egypt had a greater significance as a repressor of God's people and introducing them to idolatry. The view that Babel is the first kingdom has the advantage of providing a head for the harlot to sit upon all the way back to the initial rebellion of mankind manifested by the great city Babel. And I'll read this quote too. Just as impossible was it for the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar's day to be the mother of harlots, and for the same reason, as impossible was it for, that's a weird sentence. It does not date back far enough, and we must go further back, find it in Genesis 10 and 11. There we find it in the land of Shinar. Under Nimrod began the work in the spirit of Antichrist, his object being to build a city and to make it for his people a name, so he might not be scattered. Babel, was founded in rebellion against God. Good case for that. This would accord with the identification of the harlot as that great city, which reigns over the kings in the earth. Emphasis added for good reason. So, this term, that great city, which can solve some other problems, refers to the city of Babel. That's why it's called Babylon. And it's been the mother of harlots. Now, the description of what the city is and what happens to it in Revelation makes it a city again also. So we don't get out of having to have one city-state. This city-state has to be a commercial and religious hub of the entire world. Now, as rapidly as things are changing with the 10 kingdoms being set up, that can change too. Just putting it out there. So they're saying first king is of the 5 fallen, probably represents either Babel and Egypt. The second king probably represents Egypt or Assyria. If the first one is Babel, then the second one is Egypt. If the first king is Egypt, the second is Assyria. Then the 4 beasts, we know what they are. We've already been over that. The lion beast has eagle's wings, and this is about Nebuchadnezzar going, getting too proud of what he thought he himself had done and not recognizing God's hand. And he was given the mind of a beast for 7 years. And the wings were plucked off and things like that anyway. So that's what that's referring to. His dominion was taken, but his life was prolonged, as the scripture was, saying in here, for a season and a time, and this reflected in the contribution of its attributes to the final beast, so it had an 8th head. So what happened to Nebuchadnezzar was also a type and shadow of what the final beast would be like. The one raised up and the 3 ribs in its mouth, it says, this beast appears to correspond to the chest of arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, with one stronger than the other. The kingdom represented by the bear follows upon the overthrow of the lion. And dominion is taken from this beast, but his life was prolonged for the season of time, reflecting the contribution of its attributes to the final beast, who is the 8th head. So there's types and shadows going on here. The leopard, Alexander the Great, the 4 generals, we've already been over that. The terrible beast, the Roman Empire, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar's, in the clay of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, beast is said to be uniquely dreadful. Iron teeth is specified in Daniel, and great emphasis on its trampling and breaking to pieces, corresponding to the feet in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So it tramples like the feet do. The beast has 10 horns. We've gone over that. The kingdom devours the whole earth. Some interpreters take this beast to be Greece. I don't know why. Most conservative scholars take it as Rome. And then the quote here I'll read, probably the most decisive argument in favor of interpreting the Fourth Empire as Roman is the fact that the New Testament seems to follow this interpretation. In Christ, in his reference to the abomination of desolation, Matthew 24:15, I mentioned where he named Daniel, clearly pictures the desecration of the temple, the abomination of desolation, that's what it means, here prophesied as a future event. The Grecian view would require fulfillment in the 2nd century BC. The New Testament also seems to employ the symbolism of Daniel in the book of Revelation, presented as future. So anyway, it can also be traced to Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, for Ezra, which is in the Apocrypha, the Assumption of Moses, Baruch, all apocryphal books, and later Jewish writings cited in the Jewish Encyclopedia. A problem rises in relation to the 10 kings as a description of how the fourth beast is overthrown, as this does not correspond with the demise of the Roman Empire. The difference explains why we are discussing the beast of Daniel in our treatment of the book of Revelation. Aspects of the prophetic passages in both Daniel and Revelation suggest that the fourth beast continues beyond its initial appearance, but in a fragmented form. That's how this is fulfilled. So it says, and they emphasizing, we're quoting Daniel 2:41-44, whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, that the strength of iron shall be in it, as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and clay, so the kingdom will be partly strong, partly fragile. They will mingle with the seed of men. People argue over that statement. But they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. The days of what kings? That hasn't happened yet. The 10. Now, what does the mingling of seed? I've seen theories both ways of whether it means just cultures being mashed together, as we're seeing today, that they don't stick. You can't just ram cultures together. I kind of lean that way. Some say it means the seed of men is referring to a mixture of angels, just like in Genesis 6. For an unspecified period of time after the breakup of the fourth kingdom, Rome, it continues in a distributed form until the time of the end, when God establishes his kingdom on earth, when the stone smashes the feet of the image, including its 10 toes. Destruction of the fourth beast here, described, refers to a time yet future in connection with the second advent of Christ. Anyway, I'm skipping a little bit here for time. Terrible beast is the sixth of 7 kingdoms. They talk about some things that preterists say, and then the 7th king they talk about again. Just skipping past a little bit. They have a diagram called Symbols of Kingdoms. They've drawn the 7th king with the 6th king because it's evident from the Revelation that the fourth beast corresponds to the 6th king, that after its initial appearance and rule, the kingdom of the fourth beast fragments but continues until the time of its ultimate overthrow. The 7th king is related to, but not completely synonymous with, the 8th head, the beast. If you'll remember where's my chart? There it is. This sort of thing going on. The beast that was and is not and is himself. The 8 is the little horn. It appears that the 7th king, having received a fatal wound, enters the abyss prior to his revival as beast. This view recognizes the passage which describes the relationship between the 7th king and the beast, or 8th head, employs the phrase that was and is not. Or is that was and is not and shall come, which is associated with the wounding and subsequent ascent of the beast from the abyss. Then after that is the millennium kingdom, when Jesus comes down and smashes all opposition and sets up the 1,000 years. And of course the dragon, part of the unholy trinity, this is what will be directly worshipped in the second half of the tribulation. We are told, and this is tying them all together in case anybody wants to try to come up with theories why they're not the same entity, we're told that the dragon is, quote, that serpent of old, Genesis 3, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. The dragon is said to have 7 heads and 10 horns. Also, the heads of the dragon are said to wear diadems, which are crowns of royalty, not crowns of conquest, a further indication that the heads represent kings. The beast, who has also had 7 heads and 10 horns, is closely identified with the dragon. This reflects on the dragon's empowerment of the beast. This empowerment is likely related to the healing of the fatal wound, resulting in the beast's rise from the abyss to be marveled at by the world, and this all fits together. There's a lot of things to fit together, but they fit. I mean, a jet engine is incredibly complex, but it all fits together. Doesn't mean everybody's going to understand it, but we can see the finished jet engine and it works. There's no reason to doubt the Bible just because it's complicated sometimes. And no reason for preachers and teachers not to teach prophecy. It takes up nearly a third of the Bible, as I've mentioned before, and sometimes some people have it as more than a third. I think it's pretty important. God thinks it's important, and prophecy is the fingerprint of God. It sets apart the Bible from all other ancient texts, and you have to believe that Jesus fulfilled prophecy. That's part of the gospel expressed in, I think, 2 Corinthians 15, something like. I think that's the one where it says, or it may have been 1 Corinthians. I get the two mixed up. Which one is about reconciliation and which one says the gospel I first preached to you? Anyway, getting back to the topic here, the beast is probably the most confusing entity in a consideration of symbols representing kingdoms and individuals of the visions given to both Daniel and John. Confusion stems from several overlapping aspects, and we're listing them here as kind of a summary. The term beast is used by Daniel to describe several kings. Of the 4, the last is unique. The term beast is used by both to denote the final kingdom and the final king, which leads the kingdom among the 10 horns. The revival of the beast makes him both a ruler of a 7th kingdom and the final 8th head. The beast is said to have 7 heads and 10 horns, yet he is also of the 7 heads and is himself an 8th. That's a really like a hypercube or something, a tesseract kind of a thing. Sometimes the term beast denotes a kingdom, other times an individual. Elsewhere, the same individual is represented as a horn and a head. John sees 2 beasts, one rising from the sea and another from the earth. The first, more prominent beast is the one we describe here. We refer to the second beast from the earth by his alternate title, the false prophet. Because of these complexities, our diagram of symbols of kingdoms is necessarily imprecise and in some aspects because it's nearly impossible to accurately capture all the relationships between the various symbols which denote the beast and his kingdom in a diagram. That's why it was a complicated chart, which is helpful for students of prophecy. It's not as helpful if you're just trying to get a basic grasp, which is why I made the chart I made. Anyway, 2 aspects should be noted about the beast of the leopard, that the terrible beast is missing and the sequence is reversed. And then they have another chart here, all sorts of other little details of the little horn versus the beast of Revelation. A key difference between what John sees concerning the beast and what Daniel has shown about the little horn is the relationship between the beast and the false prophet, or second beast. The beast supports the false prophet and apparently is the source of his power. Scripture mentions that the false prophet exercises all his authority, although initially the harlot is rides upon the beast, and she rules over the kings of the earth. The 10 horns, who get authority with the beast, will turn on her. As we mentioned earlier, they say the Masoretic, and I forget what NU is, indicate that the beast also turns on her. That isn't just the kings, but also the beasts. Pretty much a non-issue. It just doesn't matter whether we understand which that is or not, because they're going to turn on her and destroy her. If she includes an apostate religious system, then this opens the way for the beast to garner all worship in her absence. That is to say, he has to get rid of all the false religions in order to have him being worshipped as God, which is what Satan has always wanted. So in the reign of the beast, the heads, sequential kingdoms, and the horns, contemporary kings, intersect in a single individual. This is the Antichrist embodying everything, tying it all together. It looks like Revelation ties together all the Bible's prophecies. He is Daniel's little horn, which puts down 3, but also the 8th head of the 7 heads. When destroyed, he is bound for perdition, the Bible clearly says in Revelation, he will be sent to the lake of fire forever. And so as far as, whether the destruction of the harlot means also the destruction of the false prophet, it doesn't say so. After the false prophet has completed his mission of making the idol and introducing the mark of the beast and all that, maybe that's when he's done away with, because he's not needed anymore. He's in the way of worship of the beast. And then the image of the beast, they talk about the beast opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship, showing he's God. That's from Paul's writing, 2 Thessalonians 2:4, in his context of telling the church there why this hasn't happened yet, why they shouldn't be fooled by people saying it had. But the commentary goes on, there is a catch. The beast is not God. In particular, he lacks God's unique attribute of omnipresence. So as long as he himself remains sitting in the temple, he's unable to venture forth on the various campaigns which are associated with his activities at the time of the end, battling against the king of the north, south, and east. This seems to be a motivation behind the instructions by the false prophet that the earth dwellers should make an image to the beast who was wounded. So he leaves the image there so he can go off and make war. He can't be in two places at once. Having established the image, the false prophet is granted power to give, that is to say, authority to give, or possibly ability, to give breath to the image, that the image would be speak and cause everyone who doesn't worship it to be killed. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable statements in all of Scripture, as it appears the false prophet is allowed by sovereignty of God's permissive control of evil to give the image life. Interesting enough, although we can't be sure, it's reasonable to think that the one purpose of the image is to continue to occupy the holy place within the temple, the Jewish temple, that's why it's desecrated, allowing the beast to venture forth to attend to his many responsibilities, leaving an icon present as the focal point of worship. Notice that both the beast and his image are objects of worship. Those who refuse are killed by beheading, it says, and those are the people who live in the second half of the tribulation and refuse to worship the image or the beast or take the mark. Those are beheaded, and they will rule on the earth over the Gentiles for 1,000 years. Although the man of sin himself first sits in the temple, Jesus infers that something inanimate is set up in the holy place. When you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. The abomination in this verse is not a person, masculine or feminine, but a thing. Now, we could say it's a grammatical issue, because the Holy Spirit in Greek, spirit is neuter gender, so it's properly the pronoun is it. So I wouldn't make this argument personally, because you can't say that it must be just a thing because the word abomination in Greek happens to take a neuter pronoun. I wouldn't do that. Anyway, going on here, following the judgments of the sixth trumpet, the rest of mankind who were not killed by the plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, so that they should not worship demons and idols. A lot of people would object and say, well, this can't be future. It must be past fulfilled prophecy, because people don't do that anymore. But they will when the idol is standing in the temple and it's alive. Interestingly, the image of the beast is the ultimate work of their hands, since the false prophet deceives those who dwell on the earth. And I think between the rising of the Antichrist and the actions of the false prophet here with the idol are possibly the great deception. Interestingly, the image of the beast is the ultimate work of their hands. As I said, and to make image of the beast, they themselves make the ultimate idol of their own worship. The image of the beast is typified by Nebuchadnezzar's gold image, what they were required to worship on penalty of death, and that's why the three friends of Daniel were thrown into the fiery furnace. Then there's stuff about the Tribulation temple, the horns and kings again. Both horns and toes and kings are 10 in number. Both are outgrowths of the last Gentile kingdom, and both are destroyed by the arrival of God's kingdom on earth. So that's how we know they're different perspectives on the same entity. Now a little bit more about the little horn. In Daniel's night vision, an 11th little horn rises up among the 10, but actually rises from the 7 also. And the terrible beast, this 11th little horn, has an appearance greater than the others. He eventually overcomes 3 of the 10 horns, leaving only 7 with himself as the 8th then. That's why he's called the 8th. The little horn, which was the 11th, now 8th, corresponds to the 8th head, although the heads represent sequential kingdoms, and the horns are contemporary kings of the last kingdom. They're one and the same in the little horn, as they mentioned earlier, for he is both the ruler of the final kingdom, head, and the primary king, the horn, among the kings of the end. So we're not surprised to learn that the little horn has a number of personal attributes which identify him with the final beast, etc. And these are all the footnotes here in this part. And this is just one part of a very long Revelation commentary. I almost said it again. So, going back to my little chart here, the primary elements to remember is the Mother of Harlots rides all 7 kingdoms. And the 7 heads correspond to these 7 mountains. They are not city on 7 hills at all. Daniel 7 and Daniel 2 refer to the same 4 kingdoms. The final beast is representative of them all, embodies all of them, and the 10 horns are what we're watching form right now. Those are the 10 horns. 2, the European Union, and now 1 is forming, 8 to go. And again, I don't know how many of these will form before the rapture. I know they must all form before the Antichrist is revealed. And the Antichrist is revealed before he signs a 7-year treaty and starts the tribulation. So I don't know if that's clarified anything. It has for me. It helps me to go over this stuff again because it just, like I said, got my attention when, as soon as, before Trump even takes the presidency, this stuff is a reality. It's happening without regard for his ability to even do it technically by our Constitution, which shows you this is not America. This is not Europe. This is the deep state, the Club of Rome, and all the plans that they made way back when, in the 60s, at least. Okay, so that's, I think, enough to say on this one topic. And like I said, hopefully it's been helpful. We'll see what happens in the days to come. Thanks for watching.